Let's talk about class and object this time. We define a class whenever we need to introduce a new type for our program or application. For example, if you want to create a student database application where you store student information like student name, ID, department, courses, etc., then it will be better to declare a separate or new type as a student, and then inside a student class you declare the other types like string, integer, and double to indicate or to actually specify the properties of any student. So class actually works as a blueprint for an object, and in real life everything is actually object. For example, a computer, a mobile, and even a person is an object. And to define the person, to define the behavior of that person, we can create a class called person, and the attributes can indicate the physical appearances, and the methods can represent the behavior of that person. So let me create a simple class called maybe student. So class student, and you have to use the name class, and the class name is student, and by convention the class name starts with a capital letter. If I don't do anything, or if I don't declare any variables or method inside this student class, we can still be able to create an object of this student or take a variable of type student. So let's go back to the main class and let me take a variable of type student. So student s1 equals, now I have to assign something inside this student, and I have to assign a constructor for the student. So the rule is you have to type the class name and you have to give this parenthesis. So by this providing this parenthesis and this name, this is actually the constructor for a class. So whenever we create a class, a default constructor is created by default by the language or the framework. So if I manually write the constructor inside this class, so that would be something like that, student and a semicolon. So this is called a default constructor, and this is the constructor parameter list, and the default constructor right now it takes no parameters. And if we define the properties inside this class, then maybe we define the constructor with those parameters, and then whenever we create an object or call the constructor, we need to provide the values for the parameters or the properties of that class. Okay, so by default, or we don't normally do declare the default constructor or empty constructor like this, because it will be automatically created by the framework. So now that we have created an object, that means a memory space has been allocated, and inside that memory space we can actually add few properties if we had properties inside our student class. So now this S1 is actually a reference to the memory address where this student memory or reference is created. By calling the constructor, we actually specify or initialize a memory space. So this is something called like initialization. So S1 is the type of student, and this way we are actually initializing S1. And after S1, if we put a dot, then we'll be able to get the properties and method that is defined inside this student class. But we know that there is no property or method defined in this student class, but still we see some options like the hash code, the runtime type, the toString, no such method. So where are these coming from? I told you earlier that we have a type called object, right? And object is actually a class, and whenever we have a class, we can create an object of that class. For example, we can create an object O from this object and calling the constructor of this object class. And if I now try to access the methods and properties of this object reference, for example O, and then press dot, you will see that we see the same methods and properties that we saw earlier for S1 S1. So basically these properties and methods are coming from the object class, and I told you that object is the class or the super parent class of all classes. Though our student class didn't extend anyone, but whenever we define a class, it actually extended our object class internally. So we don't have to write something like this, that extends object. So we don't have to write this, because if we don't even write this, Dart will make the arrangement for us. So every class actually is a child of object class, and that's why whenever we are trying to access the S1 reference, we are looking at the properties and methods of the object class that has been inherited from the object type. So let me define few properties inside this student class. For example, a student might have a name, so string name, and maybe int id, and maybe string department. So I have defined 3 properties inside this student class, and it is showing some error because I cannot just keep the properties like this, because I need to assign some values, appropriate values to these properties. I cannot just keep it like this. All you can do is you can simply assign some default values over here, but we normally don't do that. The best idea or the best solution is, now that we have 3 properties in this student class, and now whenever we try to create an instance of students, now it's our duty to provide some values for the name and the ID and the department. Actually, we are initializing a student or creating a student, but without providing the name, ID and department, student will not be complete. So how would you do that? To make it work, we have to now define a constructor by ourselves. So now define a constructor like a student, and this is the constructor parameter. We don't have to pass any body for this constructor. And now inside the constructor parameter list, simply type this.name, this.id, and this.department. So now we have a constructor in our class. And for this reason, whenever we try to initialize a student type, now we need to provide 3 arguments, and these are positional arguments, if you remember. And the arguments for a constructor works exactly the same for the arguments of a function. The way we turned the arguments of a function into positional to named and named optional, named required, the same method can be applied for constructor as well. So now I need to provide a name, an ID and department. So maybe the name should be John, and the ID may be an integer, and the department may be computer science and engineering. Okay, so now this John name is assigned into this.name. This means this student class, and name means the name property of this student class. So whatever name I pass, this will be assigned to this name property. This ID will be assigned to this ID property, and this department will be assigned to this department. That means this one. And to make it sure that everything has been assigned perfectly, you can simply print s1 dot, then you see the we get all the suggestions for the properties that is defined in this student class, as well as the other properties and methods that is coming from the object class. So now if I want to print the name of the student, and then if I want to print the department, or maybe I can combine it by using string interpolation. So inside the quotation, just write like this, bracket s1 dot name, then a space, then dollar bracket s1 dot id, and then space, and then dollar bracket s1 dot department. And now if I run this application, I think we'll be able to see all the information that we passed through the constructor. So the purpose of a constructor is to assign values to the class properties. So there are other ways to provide class property values. For example, though we have provided the values for each property, we can actually change that. So maybe I am assigning a new department for S1. So S1 dot department, maybe that should be BBA. And now if I print this application, or if I run this application, you will see the department has changed to BBA. So though we passed CSE at the first place, but at the second time we provided a different department, and the previous one is replaced with the new one. And in this way, we can actually create as many reference or as many instances as possible out of this student class. So you can simply duplicate these lines and paste it. Sorry. So we can actually paste this once, twice, thrice. So this could be S2, and this could be S3 and S4. Just change the names. So John, like Smith, like Mark, like Henry, and you also change the IDs a little bit. This is not an integer, okay, and change the departments like BBA and say machine learning and maybe EEE. Okay, so if you now use the different references, you will be only able to access the memory address which this reference actually pointing to. So in this way we can create as many references as we can, but in later sections we'll see that there are some classes out of which we cannot create any instances, for example abstract classes. So we'll see that in the later lectures, but for now just remember that we can create a separate type that actually consists of other types. That means we are actually combining three default data types to make another new type like a student. And we can define variables of our new type, and to initialize this variable we have to call the constructor and pass the appropriate values so that the fields of this class can be initialized or assigned with appropriate values.